Hey Pixies, welcome to Manis and Monsters Part 5, our finale, and I think I saved the best manicure for last in my opinion. You let me know down below which manicure was your favorite from this series. I do have some prompts on the screen as far as what I'm doing or using. Everything will be linked down below in the description box along with discount codes. If you have any questions about the actual manicure, I can try to answer them for you if you leave a comment. But I will be reading you some paranormal Reddit stories, and I just pick out some that are fascinating to me. They're supposedly true. So let's get into our first story, which is titled Strange Figures at Zoo. I work at a zoo in my hometown. It's pretty nice, and we're pretty popular, with a pretty impressive selection of animals: lions, tigers, rhinos, but also red pandas, red river hogs, Victorian pigeons, wallabies, and more. One of my favorite attractions is this big indoor aviary guests can walk through. We have all kinds of birds, some tortoises, a turtle, and even an iguana in there who have pretty interesting personalities. Recently, there have been some strange occurrences. I'm not sure when they started, but the oldest story I heard about was about a month ago. One of the keepers was in the morning replacing the feeding stations for the birds. He said he started hearing something strange. It sounded like some kind of socializing, but like none he had ever heard. He's worked in there for ages and basically raised some of these birds. He knows them well. It's kind of scary how accurate he can be. He was able to determine the calls were coming from on top of an artificial rock thing where we hid some equipment and controls for the building. None of the birds go up there because they are afraid of the motor for the waterfall. Unsurprisingly, when he went up there, he found nothing. Multiple of the night guards have heard things in there, and two have seen very tall figures standing up in this area. One guard said he was sitting just outside and heard the sounds. He went in worried one of the birds was hurt because it sounded really strange. Going in, he was exiting this artificial cave we have that's under this rock thing, and he can hear light footsteps on top. He slowly steps out with his taser out, looking up there. He says he saw a figure, a tall humanoid, hunched over the aviary looking around. He said it didn't see him, but he left and called the cops. They searched the building, then the whole zoo, and nothing. The second guard had a similar experience, but the thing did seem to see them. But there were also this other time. Apparently, they threw something like a rock at her, but she couldn't find what they tossed at her. Unfortunately, and much to many of the staff's frustration for other reasons besides paranormal, the zoo has yet to set up any cameras in the building. But one of the cameras that are outside has picked up the sound once went in particularly loud. Unfortunately, I'm just an admissions staff, so I don't have access to those cameras. But as we move into the off-season, the encounters have become so common the administration is taking notice. Our own CEO heard about it. Recently, there have been several items thrown at staff and guests. A bird was found dead, like something squeezed it to death. It was horrible, especially since the bird was such a sweet and well-known little fellow, and lots of sounds. I know there are more, but to include all the stories would take forever. I have two experiences. My first was pretty basic as I heard the vocalization. It was really strange and very loud. The scariest part was how all the birds went dead silent and the ground birds all went and hid. They aren't afraid of loud sounds normally, so that kind of freaked me out. The next was more interesting. I was walking through early in the morning and I get to the enclosure where we hold the iguana. Our iguana is pretty old and a pretty chill animal who has been at the zoo his whole life. He is such a sweet little animal and I love him to death. His enclosure is pretty open as the only separation is a sturdy net over some bars. It keeps the birds from picking on him mostly. I walk over and the section of the net that is against the rock thing is being stretched up and onto it into the foliage, like someone was trying to rip off the top. I can't see what's pulling it, and when I holler asking who is up there, it springs back and there's no sound. I redo security and wait. There's no way I wouldn't be able to see who was up there if they tried getting down or, in the unlikely event, up. Security arrives, they look around, and nothing. We check on the iguana, and he is a bit stressed, but seems no worse for wear. I had to stop typing this because something just shoved a metal shelf off the top of here, so definitely something is happening in here, and something very active. I don't know what else to say. I want to say it's a poltergeist, but it's so vocal and active. and the shadowy figures have been seen multiple times, so I'm wondering if it's a very active shadow figure. Our second story is titled Prison Night Shifts. I'm a prison officer, not a storyteller, so this may be really long and boring or full of information that's irrelevant. We start our nights at approximately 8 p.m. and are locked in until the following morning at 6 a.m. It's essentially a skeleton crew and several hundred prisoners secured behind their doors. This week just gone has been the most activity that I have ever experienced, and a lot of my colleagues who worked had spooky happenings as well. I'm not really a believer per se, however, a lot of spooky, unexplained stuff happens at night that I have no choice but to begin to believe when it's all added up together. I'll start off with some personal backstory and my experiences, and then this week's activity. At night, we usually patrol 2 linked wings, as there's no need to have staff patrolling each wing when the prisoners are asleep. There's a wing that I believe is haunted. On the 3-foot landing, when cutting in between the 2 wings, there's a sudden feeling of being watched by something from the corner. It freaks me out so much. I refuse to cut through there now, as I just feel cold and watched. I go the longer way around to access that particular landing if I have to answer a cell bell. It's the same on the ones landing on the same wing. As soon as you come down the stairs and turn to carry on the patrol, there's another horrible, oppressive feeling of being followed that gives me the heebie-jeebies. I have had emergency cell bells used by prisoners to alert staff to an emergency go off on the cells that are not occupied. Random doors slam when all the doors, apart from the toilet, staff room, and office doors, are locked for obvious reasons. And I've thought I've seen movement on CCTV cameras when I'm on my own. I've also heard things. However, anyone who has either been in prison or worked in one will know they are noisy even at night. I have never said anything about this to my colleagues because being a prison officer dealing with hardened criminals and being spooked by nothing is a surefire way to get the mick ticking out of you. Fast forward to this week, luckily I was not on this wing and was a member of staff that walks around supporting patrolling staff. I spooked a patrol in a random wing as they didn't hear me, and I made a joke about what did they think I was, a ghost? We got talking about ghosts and stuff, and naturally the subject of this wing came up. My face must have said it all because they said, "Don't tell me the 3s as you cut through and the 1s as you come down off the stairs." This is so spooky that someone else has felt the same, but also a bit relieving that it is not just me who feels it. I carried on with my rounds and chatting to people and got talking about my good jump scare and our chat. It turns out that a lot of people who work in prisons believe in ghosts after working night shifts. One of the patrols told me that they almost called me to sit with them as they heard a loud bang as though it was a cell door slamming shut. They went and investigated, and nothing. They had just sat back down and it went again. This obviously spooked them. We began talking about how it's weird that ghosts have been mentioned and that happens. He then had his own story about the wing I think is haunted, where one of the metal security gates slammed shut behind him on the 3's landing as he was cutting through one night. Now, having worked on this wing, that gate doesn't move on its own. It's heavy, let alone slam behind anyone of its own accord. We have a laugh about being blokes and scared of shadows, and I crack on with seeing the next person. To access them, I have to go through a wooden door and a metal gate. It's pitch black, and I don't have my torch. So I open the wooden door and that metal gate and step in to look for the light switch so I can see to lock the door and gate behind me. As I'm doing this, the wooden door slams shut directly behind me with huge force. I jumped. It wasn't a windy night, and we were indoors, so no breeze or anything. Let me tell you, I have never shut some doors and gates so fast in my life, so I could nope the F out of there. I spent my rounds talking about the ghosts and seeing what everyone's stories are, and there are some interesting stories, but everyone I speak to talks about this haunted wing, and either the 3's where they feel like they're being watched, or the 1s as they come off the stairs are mentioned. By this point, I had spoken to 6 staff, and all of them said the same thing. That's too much of a coincidence for me. I finally go onto the haunted wing, and I'm talking to the patrol who has all the lights on, for what I can now only assume is the obvious, as they felt it too, and I swear I see someone moving on the cameras on the 1s walking towards the office. Just before they go out of camera shot, nothing there, nothing on the playback. Wow, that's a mission of a read. Hope you enjoyed my ramblings. My colleagues have given me many stories I may type up and post one day if you liked this. Our next story is titled The Ghost at My New Job. After a pretty dismal experience working at a supermarket, I had spent over a year applying for a new position, but this landed me no success. However, within a year, I was beginning to pull myself together. I began training as a hairdresser in the north of England, whilst at the same time continuing to look for a source of additional income. After a couple of weeks of searching in my local city, I found an advertisement for a supervisor's job in a newsagent's. At first, I felt a little apprehensive about working in retail again, but after discovering that the staff of 6 were friendly as could possibly be, I decided to give it a go. On the day of the interview, the manager led me through the downstairs stockroom and up a short, narrow flight of stairs to a small office. Once in there, she asked me the common interview questions and ended up telling me she thought I seemed a friendly and respectful individual. She was willing to let me start the job almost immediately. Yet what I didn't realize that is this interview was not going to categorize as anything fundamentally average. As the basic employment paperwork was sorted, she offered to take me on a quick tour of the upstairs stockrooms, to which I casually accepted. So leading me through an opening directly next to the doorway of the office, me and her entered the stockroom. It was a neatly laid out place. Items were stocked in a systematic order around the room. Directly ahead of the entrance to the room was a small kitchen as well. However, after leading me back out of the hallway, the manager led me through a doorway and down a rather tired-looking corridor. The outcome was the derelict remains of what seemed like the setup of an old flat. Soft drinks were stored in one room, which had a large window facing directly out onto the street. Opposite this room was what seemed to be an old dining room/kitchen. In it was what seemed to be any decorative or display items left over from the shop floor. It basically seemed like a storeroom for rubbish. And out of the hallway, these 2 rooms, was a short flight of stairs with half a space landing leading up to the next floor. On this landing was a large Georgian-style window which lit the hallway up significantly with daylight. Upon entering the front storeroom, the manager abruptly asked me a simple question. "How do you feel about ghosts, by the way?" I was slightly taken by surprise when she asked me this. "Well," I said, "I'm a firm believer. Why? Don't tell me you've got one." "We do indeed," she said. "She's an old lady called Connie. We've actually had somebody walk into the shop with his family and tell us he could sense something. Upstairs, he told us that Connie was the old resident of the building when it was still a house." "How did she die then?" I asked uneasily. "According to the psychic, she got trapped in a walk-in cupboard in the empty flat above us and eventually died. If you feel like doubting what he said, I've had delivery drivers come in and tell us there's an old lady looking out the window above the front door." "Have any of you seen her?" I questioned. "No," she replied, "but we hear things pretty often, although if you come up here to fetch any stock, just make sure you say hi to her." Out of my instinctive fear of the unknown, I decided then and there to introduce myself to the spirit. "Hi, Connie, my name's blank. Nice to meet you. I'm the new employee." Merely seconds after I'd spoken, a loud bang came from upstairs, along with the sound of shuffling feet. Me and the manager looked up at the ceiling. Her expression was one of expectation, where I simply laughed in sheer disbelief. "Was that her?" I said. Remaining silent, the manager nodded. My job began with a lot of till work, along with the enlisted care of the alcohol replenishment. I would often have to make trips upstairs throughout the day. All this time, I would greet Connie in a pleasant manner and chat away to her as if we were there in the flesh. Yet after a couple of weeks, I began to learn just how powerful a spirit she was. During a morning shift, my colleague was helping me serve a busy rush, and upon a customer's request for a packet of cigarettes, my colleague turned around and opened up the cabinet. Without hesitation, nearly every packet of cigarettes stacked up came flying out of the open door of the cabinet and pelted him. Another experience was when I was locking up at the end of the day and turning the light out downstairs. Making my way to the stairs, I bid Connie good night. The moment I looked away, however, I heard feet stomping on the wooden floor of the corridor towards the stockroom. The footsteps were approaching me as well. Fear then overtook me and I just bolted down the stairs and out the staff exit. During my time settling into the new job, I would often hear footsteps above the shop floor and hear objects being thrown around. Occasionally, I swore I could hear a voice moaning as well. Additionally, whilst carrying stock down the stairs one day, I turned around at the bottom only to see a pair of knee-high legs and stockings wearing buckled shoes following me down the staircase. Although what I didn't know was that the most conclusive paranormal experience in my mind was yet to come. It was the day of a large delivery and I was tasked with carrying most of the stock upstairs. I managed this pretty easily within a couple of hours. However, once we reopened the shop, my boss realized she had forgotten to take up a box of thermal paper rolls. So because I had just finished restocking the crisps, she asked me to take them up to the flat while she served the customers. Reluctantly, I complied. I walked down the corridor slowly, feeling so apprehensive that I began to hold my breath. I peered into the derelict kitchen and told Connie I would only be quick. Hurriedly, I walked into the room, placed the box next to the old sink. However, once I turned around to leave, a couple of old, but nevertheless large display stands laying on the floor rattled loudly. I turned my head and saw them moving across the floor towards me with a frightening speed. I felt as if I was going to vomit and nearly tripped and fell as I ran so fast. I sprinted down the corridor, back down the stairs, into the shop. My boss could only fall into hysterics when she saw my face was as pale as a sheet and I was hyperventilating. From that day on, I refused to ever enter the flat again. Even my colleagues felt the same way. I still see and hear the occasional visit from Connie, but over the past few months, she has calmed down significantly. Put it this way, what I at first deemed would be a boring retail job turned out to be an experience beyond the comprehension of what I believed I would see and hear in my life. Okay, this is our finished manicure and I was in love with this one. So if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up. It helps YouTube recommend it to others. Make sure you're subscribed with your notifications on. I have new videos every Monday and Thursday, and we will be getting into some fall manicures next week. So I'm looking forward to that. If you have any questions, you can leave a comment below or find me on Instagram at @dippingpixie. That's it for this one, guys, and I will see you in the next one.